right. So hi, everybody. I'm Shelley. Thanks for coming to my fireside chat, virtual fireside chat. This is kind of nice because none of our hair is going to smell bad, although we might need more snacks. It's so nice to be here. I'm honored to be a part of your event. Hello, Valerie. So we have some time together, and
what happened?
You're muted.
We can't hear you, our friend.
I'm muted. Okay, sorry. You know, you think how many times that I would do this that I would figure out Zoom, hey? Okay, so there's a few more people coming in. Give everybody a chance. While we're waiting, this is going to be a Q&A. So if you would just want to start putting some questions in the chat box while we wait for everyone to arrive, I'll introduce myself and then we'll get going. Yeah. Hi, Andy. Katie. Oh my goodness.
Aloha.
Aloha. Absolutely. I know I'm in Honolulu. There we go. Thank you, Laura. Okay, so I'll get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Shelley. And we are here together for a little bit of time to get ready for our event tomorrow, or our session tomorrow. And so I love these ones because we get to like interact a little bit, and you get a chance to ask some questions.
I got my socks back from the dog, Shelley.
Oh, good. Oh, good, Andy. So I think what we're going to do is, so if you know me, my research is inclusive education and supporting students and teachers to figure out how to do this in ways that are manageable. And I've been really, really fortunate to work through some jurisdictions through California, Washington, and just all over. I'm in Hawaii doing a conference tomorrow, so it's been pretty fun to get to meet everybody and to figure out how we're moving this forward. How we're going to start, actually, because we're on Zoom, I don't know if we can do this, but I'd love to hear from you, but I know sometimes it's useful if we can kind of connect with each other to come up with some questions. So I would love to just hear what you're thinking about. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to put you in a breakout group for 3 minutes, okay? And in that 3 minutes, just like maybe introduce yourself and just kind of maybe come up with a question as a group or a comment, and then we'll put them in the chat box and then we'll get going. How does that sound? If you are already with someone, you can just talk to them, but let's fill up this chat box with a whole bunch of questions and get this party started. Okay, you ready? So I'm going to open up the rooms for 3 minutes, come up with a question together, and I'll see you on the other side. On your mark, get set, go. So rooms are closing. Everyone is making their way back. So if you in your breakout groups came up with a question, please add that to the chat box now. And there's a couple coming in, so I'm just going to go through them as we go and hopefully get to as many as we can. Okay, here we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so our first question comes to us from the other platform, and it says, can you share your thoughts around how a school system can educate and prepare families on inclusion in UDL? There's a lot of fear around unfamiliar topics. That is very true. What might co-designing look like between the school and community? Have you seen any successful ways that school systems have been leveraging student voice into its policy making? Oh, those are really good questions. Okay, well, I can start off with like how a school system can educate and prepare families. I think that's a really fair question. I think probably most of us didn't grow up in inclusive systems. And so, you know, if we haven't grown up, then often parents haven't grown up, and, you know, we've been exposed to how education has shifted. And I think people like to kind of really hold on to what they know. I know that where we are right now, probably many places around the world, there's a lot of new research, for example, even just around how math is taught and the panic that has caused with homes and families, you know, seeing their kids being taught differently than how they were taught. And so How I've seen this kind of like demystified, the best way is just to bring exactly what this question is, bring parents and families in as a part of the process. Talk to them. The district that I was in, as they were shifting towards inclusion, they had focus groups all over the community where parents and students and self-advocates could all come and share goals. And then a report was created that pulled in that community voice, which was a part of determining what inclusion looked like for the school district. And it wasn't an issue of if it was going to happen or not, because it's a human rights issue, but they did refer to that report in terms of kind of like facilitating the goals and the rollout and really understanding. So I guess it kind of gets successful school systems kind of leveraging that was more family focused. In terms of like student voice, the best example of student voice that I've really seen in terms, not necessarily policy making, but definitely decision making, is some of the shifts that have been happening in Canada, especially Western Canada, around IEPs, individual education plans, and how they've really moved away from their original intent of being documents of self-determined, student-developed, co-constructed plans, to really becoming kind of like auditing documents and compliance papers. And so there's been a lot of work, and it's something near and dear to my heart to be like, how do we get kids and families as a part of the co-creation of IEPs? But in both of those situations, it's about, making opportunities for parents' voices and students' voices to actually be heard and collected, but also responded to. I've also seen examples where, the voices are collected, but they're not used or referred to. And so I think just creating lots of opportunities, making sure that as many barriers are reduced as possible in terms of getting input from families, whether that's language translation or happening outside of the workday, and making sure there's childcare, like just a lot of examples to reduce barriers, because it's exactly it. If people aren't involved in the process, there's going to be a lot of fear. So I appreciate that for sure. Have I seen any successful ways that school systems have been leveraging students' voice into policymaking? See, policymaking is a little tricky because we don't really have the same type of policy structure in Canada as you do in the States, but I can definitely, I guess the equivalent would be decision making. I know whenever there's a new school built in our jurisdiction, they always have a student forum to talk about how that new school is going to be structured and organized. There was one school where the grade 10, 11, and 12 students came together, and they asked what would be the best way for you to learn. And they said, we want all our academics in the morning. And so they rearranged the timetable so that they could have all their kind of like heavier academics in the morning and then their electives in the afternoon. So I think it's just really making sure that the opportunity is presented and that we're listening, but also I think like giving ourselves permission to be creative and innovative, and really allowing ourselves to like ask that question, like, are we doing what we always done because we're doing that's what's always been done, or it's because it's the right thing to do for families and kids? And I think not post-COVID, hopefully post-COVID, we've had to pivot in a lot of ways. And so it's a good opportunity to start having some of these conversations for sure. How to get more, so next question from Kim. How to get more help for our students when admin aren't listening, especially with staffing issues? Oh man, it's so frustrating when administration is a barrier. Man, that's so hard. Everything in terms of inclusion is about reducing barriers. And I know that resources are a big one. And when I think of resources, I think of people, funding, and time. Like that, and inclusion needs all of those things. And so I think, absolutely we need to advocate for more resources, 100%. And I think when there's barriers with administration, I think part of that conversation is, yes, we need more resources, and how do we look at how resources are currently used and advocating to use them in more optimal ways? Because sometimes the barriers for administration is there are no more resources, but if we can kind of present a solution and not just the problem, there's often more opportunities for admin to respond. So for example, there's a lot of advocacy for inclusive programs, but there's also a lot of resources that go into non-inclusive activities and non-inclusive programs. And so even saying, hey, what if we rearrange things and use these resources in more inclusive ways? Often it comes down to not just we know that it's effective, but also it's efficient. And sometimes administrators like to look at the efficiency because they have the bird's eye view of a whole system. So, I think, definitely be aware of problems, definitely advocate to move things forward, but also, really look around and look at how resources are currently being used and say, hey, this could be more inclusive. Is there ways that we can shift it? Because I think admin are sometimes in between, trying to manage demands from both sides. And so if we can present the solutions, they don't have to come up with them. And so I think, especially if they haven't had experiences in inclusive contexts, they may not know what to do either. So, looking for problems, but also suggesting solutions, I have found useful. Megan asks, what's my favorite place to visit? Oh, I love this question. So my favorite place to visit, there is a little town on the far west coast of Vancouver Island called Tofino, and it's like cold Hawaii. There's tacos, there's whales, there's surfing, but you never sweat. It's a dream. Honestly, everyone should go. You're all invited. Oh, Mary Jane says, what are the necessary systems to be in place in order to support a change in mindset, a change in culture, change in practice, and a general education setting? Oh, those are all very different questions. Okay, number one. Change in mindset. You can't change people's minds. That's why this is hard. So what do? It's kind of like what is that saying? You lead the horse to water, but you can't force him to drink. But we can make that water look like this is going to be the best water you ever drank. We can make it really lucrative. And so some ways to help people shift mindsets, what I have found is the most successful is to show people what's possible. Like we talked about earlier, very few of us grew up in inclusive contexts. And so, it's hard to believe what you've never seen. And so I find a really great way to change mindset is to show people, show them, highlight positive examples, get people to look, get people to reflect. Because I have to believe that people within education, they want kids to do well. They want them to be successful. I have to believe that. And so often if there's barriers to inclusion, it's because they just haven't seen it. They don't believe it. And so I think that's a great way to change that mindset. In terms of changing practices, there is research that shows how you change teacher practice. And the most powerful ways are through collaboration, through ongoing opportunities for teachers to try new practices over time, being guided through inclusive planning approaches so that they know what to do. But it's a part of the day, it's a part of the year. And so, if you look at research around professional development, the most power comes from if teachers have an opportunity to come back every couple of weeks, try something new, reflect on it, set new goals, but also look at it in terms of it doesn't have to necessarily be exactly the same everywhere. So it's not a training. It's more about, it's called inquiry oriented. And so you get to choose, teachers get to choose what they want to try. It's not about forcing, it's not about compliance. It's about, here are a whole bunch of different inclusive practices. You choose what makes sense for you and your kids. And then having opportunities to come back and reflect on that. That's what we know changes teacher practice. And especially if they can do that in collaborative ways. And if we want that change to happen in general education classrooms, we have to have classroom teachers working with special education teachers to make that. Because I've never met a classroom teacher who knows everything, and I've never known a special educator who knows everything, but you need both those perspectives to be able to meet the needs of all the kids. And so having opportunities for that partnership to develop, and co-teaching is a great way to do that, but it's not the only way to do that. There's many ways that we can create that infrastructure for those two people to get together and work together. And so if you are a teacher out there and want to advocate for something, the biggest impact for making this feel more manageable, it is not class size, it is not composition, it is collaboration. So advocating for time with a support teacher to plan for everyone instead of a dividing and conquering. It's like a parenting model, right? Making decisions together, supporting all kids together. You need both perspectives to do this work, and nobody can do it alone. Susan says, how do we get every teacher to recognize that all students are our students? All students are our students. Well, that's that parenting model, right? I mean, like, I'm a parent now and my wife is due again. And it never has crossed my mind, not once, that I'll be like, well, I'll take care of this kid and you take care of that kid, right? Like, that's not how it works. And so, you know, if we want our educators to see kind of that responsibility for all kids, we need to make decisions together. And, you know, the systems of education weren't designed like that. We were very much designed as a divide and conquer model. Education is very siloed. So we're pushing back against some pretty significant barriers, but one of those is, how do we come together to support everybody instead of dividing and conquering? I know it seems like that would be the effective thing to do or the efficient thing to do, but then there's always going to be the us and them, and that's fundamentally against that sense of community that inclusion requires. Valerie says, are there resources to help teachers include kids without an incoming aid to support? Yeah, this is becoming a bigger question, just because and aides, paras, EAs are critical to the inclusive conversation. They themselves, however, are not the answer. If we have an aide in our classroom, they're a part of that parenting model, but it's very possible that we won't get those aides. And so I find that probably the biggest impact to support students who don't have access to an aide is building on successes, right? And so, you know, kids are, because the biggest question I often get is, you know, what do you do with students who have challenging behavior, who have anxiety, who are not engaging? And those things happen because kids don't feel successful. And so one thing we can do if we don't have an aide is to guarantee that kids are successful right off the bat. They're going to have a higher chance of engaging in a positive way if they start off feeling successful. And so that really connects with curricular design frameworks, starting from accessibility, building on interests. And so a lot of those universal design for learning strategies that we're all learning about, those are designed to reduce barriers and increase access. And if you think about context in your own life, where do you feel the most belonging and the least anxiety? It's where you have success and where you're interested. And so I think UDL is going to be a really, really key resource, especially if we don't have the people that we need, right? I mean, if we're up to me, I'd make sure every classroom had an aide, because a tripod of parents to support all the kids, you can do a lot with 3 people. But it's also then, if you do have an aide, making sure that we're using them in optimal ways as well. We know that a one-to-one is not going to be optimal either, and so it's really making sure that whatever the adults are attached to the classroom, that everyone's working together, because that's really where you're going to see the impact. Paul O'Brien says, group 10, inclusion, buy-in from staff, understanding and agreeing that all our students are our students. Again, all of these questions are connecting to the C word, right? Collaboration, creating opportunities for teachers to work together for all kids. Part of my research that is near and dear to my heart too is that we were taught in special education to adapt and modify for individuals, which actually isn't a very efficient model. You know, it's really about how do we plan for everyone from the start, and I think that helping everyone to see that all the kids are all of our kids is really moving away from that retrofitting for individual students and just being, let's look at all of our kids and say, where do we need to start so that everyone is successful? I think that's gonna really make a really big impact. Changing culture. Oh man, this again, make it seen, make people see it, make people see it. Laura says, general education teachers are asking me, how can we meet students? What is SAI? Is it like special education minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so how do we meet special education minutes? What should they look like in the IEPs? Okay, so this is going to kind of depend on your jurisdiction, but one thing that we had to navigate in our context when we started to move towards
We'll find out what the name of these are one day.
Hold on. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Here we go. One thing that we had to navigate when we were talking about special education minutes is, you know, for a long time, because students weren't historically included, special education minutes were like considered face-to-face minutes. And so how do you do that if kids are in a classroom? And so one thing that we advocated for was special education minutes. If a special education teacher is working with a classroom teacher, whether that's co-teaching, collaborating, whether that's small group instruction, station teaching, if they are working with the class, that counts as special education minutes, because it was looking at designing for special education is just, and even if not more valuable than designing for individuals. And so it's shifting to that universal model. But it's also an example of how IEPs need to evolve, because IEPs were not designed to be inclusive. And so restrictions like special education minutes, for example, they don't fit into the infrastructure of an inclusive classroom. Because the whole point of an inclusive classroom is that the classroom teacher gets access to a special education teacher to service the whole community, but they can't do that if they're forced to provide face-to-face minutes with an individual student. So that was part of the negotiating around, if we're going to like moving to inclusion, there's got to be some shifts in the infrastructure and IEPs. And so one like big advocacy journey that I'm on right now is, okay, well, IEPs are really important. Like I really believe in them, but if we want kids to be included, they have to evolve so that IEPs are actually reflected and connected to the classroom that kids are in. It can't be a separate document that's not a part of the class plan. And so that's something that I'm working on with a few different jurisdictions, because IEPs are actually becoming a barrier to inclusion because they're not designed to be inclusive, and they're important. And so how do we evolve them so that they're still keeping us accountable to meeting the needs of kids, but also not getting in the way of meeting those needs in an inclusive way? Good question, good question. Melissa asks, what resources are available to increase inclusive opportunities for our students in SDC classes? Talk to me, what's an SDC class? I know education is filled with acronyms. What does that mean?
Special day class, like a self-contained classroom.
Got it. Resources. Oh my goodness, there's so many resources. Okay. Let me think here. Oh my goodness. Okay. Resources. Michael Waymeyer, one of my favorite. He talks about strength-based programming for students with intellectual disabilities. June Downing talks about using literacy as a vehicle to get kids connected to curriculum. Dr. Diane Browder has great resources to support students' access to general education curriculum. Oh my goodness, there's so many. You know who's another one that I love? Oh, what's their name? You know what I'll do? I'll make a resource list. Okay, and I'll post it on my blog. Here's my blog. I'll put it in the chat box. This is my research area. So I mean, like, you can read my book. That's my shameless plug. Okay, ready? Here we go. I'm going to put my blog some more on here. And what I'll do is I will make a resource list or link a resource list for resources to support those special education programs. Okay. Oh, let's see here. What are the responsibilities of the SAI, so that's special education teacher versus general education teachers? Well, this is the part that's tricky, because like for a long time they have been like, the special education teachers, you figure out these kids, and the general education teachers, you figure out these kids, but that's not going to work in an inclusive model, right? So we're talking about this like parenting model where people are working together. So there is some research that shows that to support inclusion, we have to really look at changing those roles and responsibilities so that it's not like that like you do this, but like really coming together to make those decisions together, writing IEPs together, making programming decisions together, right? Susan, this is a great question. How do we encourage friendships? Okay, this is the most important thing, is that it's important to remember is that when kids with and without disabilities are together in a classroom or any context, friendships rarely form when there's a power imbalance, okay? And the reason why that's important is because often what happens in classrooms is the interactions that are facilitated between kids with and without disabilities is a helping role. So they'll pair kids with disabilities up with kids without disabilities and say to the kid without disabilities, help them. Like it's a buddy system friendships are not going to form. Now, there is a time and a place to help each other. That's not what I'm saying. But where friendships form is when there's an equal interaction. And equal interactions happen not in a helping relationship, but in a shared experience. Okay, so if you want to facilitate friendships, we want kids to be in an experience together where they're both learning, an experience together where they're both playing, in experiences together where they're both using supports. And so, although there is absolutely a time to help, we don't want to rely on that as the only interaction that kids have with each other, okay? And so a great example of this is if we're planning kind of like learning activities, making sure that when we're designing an activity, both kids are learning. So it's not just that like having peers just be like another teaching position. That's not going to help, because that's where kids see the wonder and curiosity in each other. That's where kids and peers start to see the abilities of students with disabilities, and that it's that type of shared experience that's going to develop those friendships. I love that question, Susan. Oh, here we go. What does co-teaching look like when meeting students' IEP minutes? Okay, so that just goes back to that question. It's going to depend on your jurisdiction. Advocating for if a special education teacher is co-teaching with a general education teacher, that is special education minutes. And that's what you have to advocate for. Otherwise, there's never going to be enough resources, right? And so when a special education teacher is attached to the class, that counts, not just attached to the individual, okay? Katie says, thank you for answering my questions. Right now, my team is working on an SST on the learning environment versus on the student. Everything is like inclusion, and this is probably one of my biggest critiques of IEPs, is that they're not place-based, they're not community-based, they're individual-based, but inclusive classrooms are place-based. They're based in the community. When you think about place-based, you're thinking about who I am, like who you are, why you're there, and who you're with. And so if we want IEPs to actually support inclusive classrooms, they have to answer those questions, like who is the kid, what do they need, and who are they with? It has to connect to all three of those things in order for it to not just be an extra thing that teachers need to do. Because if it's an extra thing, it's not going to get done, because no one has time for extra things. Have you talked to teachers lately? They're exhausted. Okay. Andy says, are we doing what we're doing because it's always been done, or because it's the best for students and families? I mean, we should say that to ourselves every single day, because here's the thing. Education is a dynasty of deficit, people. Do you know what I mean? Like, we are fighting generations of looking for what's wrong, right? And so part of this is kind of stepping back for our kids, for our schools, for our classrooms, for our families, and being like, what's going on that's right? You know what I mean? What are kids bringing? What are families bringing? We can't change who the kids are. We can change what we do around them. And so changing what we do around them, that's where the creativity comes from. That's where the innovation comes from. So we have to be brave. Then we have to ask hard questions, and we need to say, maybe we're going to read a different book this year. Maybe we're going to try a different schedule this year. Maybe we're going to try something new. And it's hard, but it's not as hard as kids who are navigating this, who actually can't change fundamentally who they are. So even though it's hard for us to shift those barriers and reduce those barriers, it's still easier than what a lot of our kids and families are navigating. And so it's important to kind of keep that in mind. Laura. Okay. Dude, you can't change mindset. You can lead them to the water, but you got to make the water look really good. Like I use the bus metaphor. The bus metaphor is like, you can't force someone on the bus, but you can make the bus worth choosing. Karaoke, snacks, Corona, just get it on there. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Marilyn Friend? I really, yes, I appreciate Dr. Marilyn Friend a lot. She's a great resource, and I'll include her on the list. Okay, let's see. Time is every educator's kryptonite. It's so true, which is why we need to be really optimal about the time that we have. Here's a great little example. Okay, so there was a elementary school principal trying to shift towards a more inclusive model. And a lot of people didn't want to shift because they're fearful, right? And so they were doing pullout, and there was classes where, and how it was figured out on the schedule, what had been done forever was if you received pullout, you got 17 minutes of special education time 3 times a week. Okay. and you got pulled out. But the problem with pull out is it takes kids 11 minutes to get there. So I mean, like, that's a really non-optimal use of time. So the principal's like, hey, why don't we shift to more collaborative support? And some teachers shifted. A lot of teachers were like, no, like, those kids need to get their pull out time. So that's a perfect example of a shift in culture and a shift in mindset. You can't force people to change what they do. So what this principal did, sneaky guerrilla tactics, people. She said, you don't have to give up your pull out, but if you give up your pull out, if you change your pull out to collaborative time, you get triple time. So instead of having your kids leave for 17 minutes 3 times a week, you can get push in support for like 60 minutes twice, or like 6 times a week. Like, it was worth their while to get on the bus. It was worth their while to drink the water, whatever metaphor you want. So you can keep what you're doing, but if you choose to shift your practice, there's an incentive. There's something that's going to make your life easier if you shift your practice, because people need support to do it, right? Anyways, Amy says we have to stop thinking in general education and special education buckets and think about education. It's all education. That's it. We got to work together. We got to work. Yeah, it's collaboration is like, it's like the single most effective and impactful thing we can do to get this work done. Like, none of us can do this by ourselves, right? Katie says, I also wonder about how we need to leverage student voice in all design, IEP goals, instructional design, system and environmental design. How would educators know what options to design if the students have no way of voicing the options they need? Oh, it's so true. And I think, like, a lot of people, like, I've heard people say to me, well, what if they don't have a voice? And I'm like, no, every kid has a voice. We just haven't found a way to capture it, right? And so it's really, you know, like, every kid has it. So we got to figure that out. We got to figure it out. And so part of this IEP journey that I'm on right now is trying to figure out, okay, like, if these are documents that need to be co-constructed with kids, like, you need to see their voice front and center as a part of that document. And it can't be the parent's voice. It's got to be the kid's voice. It can't be the teacher's voice. It's got to be the kid's voice. So what are the different ways that we're creating access so kids are able to share their voice? And so that's the next book that I'm working on, is how do we kind of shift IEPs to be more inclusive and competency based, so that students have a chance to share what's important to them and what their values are. I read a really good article that I can post in the resource list that was about you know, like, sometimes we get really caught up in inclusion being about equality, which it is, right? Like, everyone deserves a free and appropriate public education, yes. But then someone asked a question. They said, is it actually fair to expect every single kid to, how is it, I have to word it very carefully. Is it actually fair to to ensure that every kid accesses general education curriculum? Or is it more equitable to say, we ensure that every kid has the opportunity with the supports, right? And then kids actually get to decide what is of value to them and what is important to them. And so it's our job to design the opportunities, but, like, it's not about force. It's about how do we create opportunities for kids to have a voice in that, instead of us telling them what to do. Say, hey, look at all of these opportunities that you can engage in your education, and they're equal opportunities, but for them to finally have a say, to say, hey, I really want to focus on this year. I want to focus on this. And that's really aligned to kind of competency-based instruction for all kids, and where a lot of curriculum reform is moving to, because that's self-regulated learning, which is a really key skill for all kids to have. Tawny, I'll make a resource list, okay, and I'll put those names in there. Michael Giangreco. I love him. Michael Giangreco, if you've seen any of the comics, he makes these comics. He's such I love him because he creates really accessible media for his research. So Susan says he is retired, but yeah, he's got great resources in terms of supporting students, and he's funny. So look up, I'll add him to the list too. Oh man. Shelley, will your book be available tomorrow to purchase in person? I'd love to buy it, and getting your signature would be amazing. Okay, do you mean, like, I'm not in California? I don't know if my book is there, but you know what? If you send me an email, I'll just sign a book for you. No problem. Bravery takes many forms, Isabel. Amen. Amen. Katie says, I would love for others passionate about these topics to register for our team's webinar series. Look, we have a resource here. Yeah, the student-centered support plans, IEPs, and parents as part of the co-design process. Okay, so Katie Wyatt has a link here. Go there if you want to form a collective, because that's how we do this work. How do we move from a push-in to a co-taught model? Oh, man. Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. So Katie Novak has great resources on that. She does a lot of work around, what is co-teaching and what are the different types of co-teaching. And so it's not just like a push-in where you're sharing space, but so look up Katie Novak. I'll put up her resources there too. Oh, yes, Stephanie, you send me an email. Did you finish the second book? Okay. Andy knows how tumultuous my life is. Okay, so I started to write a second book, and the second book is all about inclusive and competency-based IEPs, student-centered. And then I thought I could write that book and do a dissertation at the same time, which you can't. I don't recommend it at all. So I had to put the book on hold so I could finish my dissertation, which is closer and almost finished, by the way. And so I've actually picked up the other book again. So my goal is to get that finished over this term and hopefully have it released in the spring. So it'll be ready for next school year. That's the goal. But you can pre-order that. That's on Amazon, and that is all going to be about IEPs, and it's like my baby. This is my baby. I love it. We're going to have a photo shoot when it's done. Me and the book. Also maybe the dissertation. Friends, this has been really, really fun. Okay, here's your last job. Ready? Your last job in the chat box. Write one useful idea from our conversation this morning. One takeaway from our conversation this morning. Type it in the chat box. I can't wait to see. And as you're doing that, I'm going to just tell you that I'm so excited for tomorrow. We are going to talk shockingly about inclusion. We're going to tell some funny stories, and we are going to make it really useful and fill our cups up so we can go back into the big bad world. Eric says the C word, collaboration. Totally. Push in and collab. Good. Focus groups in the community for what inclusion should look like. Honestly, the community is our biggest resource. Making water look tasty. Honestly, right? Team collaboration. Show them what it looks like. Show people. I really believe teachers are like creative people. We need to see it. Figure out how to sweeten the water. Honestly, those little Crystal Light packages with the raspberry flavors. We need raspberry flavored water for the people, right? Oh my goodness. Are we doing it because it's comfortable, or are we doing it because it's best for kids? Honestly, you guys, I have so appreciated this time with you. My lemon shirt. Thank you for noticing. There it is, my lemon shirt. I'm holding on to summer as long as possible. Joseph says the biggest impact to support students without an aid is to build on successes by helping students feel successful right off the bat. 100%. Start from accessibility. It hurts nobody. Modeling and showing others. When life gives you lemons, Andy, let's make the water lemonade. Let's make a giant lemonade stand. People, no, Kool-Aid. Drink the Kool-Aid. We have come full circle, people. Drink the Kool-Aid. Drink the Kool-Aid. Friends, I have had an absolutely amazing time with you today. I am so, Katie drank the Kool-Aid. I think everybody here is drinking the Kool-Aid, and it's delicious. Let's be real. Kool-Aid, Crystal Light lemonade, whatever. Differentiation, people. I will see you tomorrow, and we will keep this party going. Until then, please enjoy the rest of your day. And I'm gonna go sit by a pool for a little bit and then go back to work, go swimming. I hope that you all have a chance to connect with each other and just really enjoy this time. And good work, everybody. Keep going. Thank you. See you tomorrow, everyone.